Hey everyone, welcome to this week's stock and macro update. So this week I want to go over Enphase, which is another stock in our 21 Disruptors Index. Then I want to get into a quick performance review over the past week for the index versus the rest of the market. Then I want to talk a little bit about the Cameco acquisition of Westinghouse, big deal in the nuclear industry. And then I want to finish off by going over the CPI report for last week. So just starting off, brief overview of Enphase. Obviously, solar is a huge growing field right now. It has been for quite a while, but over the past couple of years, it's actually grown at a much quicker rate. Overall, solar is the number one growing alternative energy source in terms of the amount of electricity generated, and it set the last year was the 17th straight year that it was number one in that area. So Enphase is a major player in this industry. They're one of the fastest growing solar companies out there. They actually are creating kind of an all-in-one system for companies as well as households to use to generate and store solar electricity. So a few key things that they produce are microinverters. This was really what gave them their big push into the solar industry. Microinverters, basically what they do is they are a component in solar panels that just make the amount of sunlight that goes into the solar panel a lot more efficient. So they can absorb more. They are better with if one part of the solar panel doesn't work, it doesn't ruin the whole panel, which is how it used to be. So that is probably their flagship product, but they've also come out with batteries in the past few years. Those have taken off, and actually the amount of storage that they've sent or sold in terms of batteries, I think almost tripled in the first half of this year from the first half of last year. So bigger clients are definitely taking note of this and ordering bigger battery systems. And then they also just bought a company last December that makes EV chargers. So, with those three things alone, that's a lot of ground that they're covering in giving people and companies an all-in-one kind of solar system. And they also have an app that you can manage it all from, and that app has millions of downloads at this point. So these products are definitely being used, and the demand for these is also clear by the amount of revenue that they're taking in. So in 2018, they brought in about $316 million in revenue. This year, they're expected to bring in about $2.24 billion in revenue, which is a 609% increase in just 4 years. So obviously, they're not going to grow at that pace forever, but just in the past 4 years, that kind of growth is pretty outstanding. And it's definitely set them apart from the crowd in terms of demand for their products and also demand for their stock. So they are also in a pretty good position in terms of cash. They've got $1.25 billion in cash. They've got about $1.2 billion in debt. And of that debt, I know it sounds like a lot, but only $88 million is due in the next several years. So most of that debt is due in 2026 and 2028. So they are in a very good position there. Their free cash flow is very, very strong. They're bringing in a lot of cash to fund their operations outside of that debt that they took out. And again, the debt isn't due for quite a long time. And as they continue to grow, it's not going to be any trouble for them to pay that off. So just a closing note on solar. Right now, despite this growth and despite being the top alternative energy source in terms of growth for the past 17 years, solar still only accounts for 3.7% of global electricity generation. So Enphase is doing really well, not only in the U.S., but they also have a rapidly growing European business, and it's a wide open field still. Again, there's a lot of market share for them to take, and it is really their market to lose at this point in a lot of areas. So very bullish on them, definitely a key player in our 21 Disruptors Index. So quick performance update. The Disruptors Index over the past week down 3.87%. Rough time for growth stocks for sure. S&P 500 during that time 1.11% gain. The Nasdaq was up 2.11%. Russell 2000 up 2.09%. ARKK, the growth proxy, down 3.06%. So in our index, the top three performers were Airbnb up 7.33%. Proto Labs up 2.18%, and Bitcoin was number 3 at 0.33%. The bottom three performers were Cameco, down 15.17%, Pinterest down 10.31%, and Guardant Health was down 10.24%. Guardant's been one of the top performers for a while, so their stock is definitely taking a breather now, but has overall been a pretty strong stock considering what's been going on with the growth market over these past couple months. Airbnb been very strong. It's kind of bucking the trend with a lot of growth stocks. It's actually outperforming the S&P by I think 24%, or 24% I think in Q3 is what it outperformed by, and now in October it's outperforming by another 7 or 8%. So definitely good to see some strength out of that. Now I want to get to Cameco because, like I said, they were the worst performer over the past week in our index, but they just made a huge acquisition. They bought 49% of Westinghouse, which is one of the biggest nuclear utility companies in the world. It might actually be the biggest, but they spent $2.2 billion, or they're going to spend that much to make this purchase in equity. And last month, actually, they filed for a $1.5 billion share offering, and they ended up filling a lot of this at $21.95. This pushed the stock down a lot because that's where the market bid for that share offering. So we see some, if you didn't know what was going on, you'd be like, that's a really bearish sign because the stock dropped seemingly out of nowhere. But it is because of this share offering and this deal. I think this deal is actually really bullish because Cameco is already one of the biggest producers and refiners of uranium on the planet. They have kind of their whole self-sufficient system for everything from mining to delivering uranium products. And now they've bought almost half of the biggest utility company in the world with Westinghouse, and Westinghouse actually services over half of the nuclear reactors in the world. So as nuclear makes a comeback, and we're seeing this already in Germany, where they said they're reversing course on shutting down three of their last three nuclear reactors. They're actually going to keep those online. The U.S. is set to begin or go online with their first new nuclear power plant in, I believe, over 3 decades, and that's down in Georgia. So we are seeing a lot of developments in the nuclear uranium field. And the size of this deal, I think, is very bullish too, because we haven't seen a multi-billion-dollar deal in the nuclear market for probably at least a couple decades at least. So this is a big deal for that reason, and also the fact that Cameco is doing it is interesting too, because in their last earnings call, they kind of got criticized a little bit from analysts for being too conservative with their cash. And they were like, the uranium is set to go up a lot. What are you going to do with this cash? Are you looking at making any strategic decisions, which basically means are you looking to buy anyone? And the management kind of gave a kind of indifferent, non-committal answer, but obviously this deal was going on behind the scenes. They probably just couldn't say anything about it. So for a company that is seen as being overly conservative, spending billions of dollars says that they really do believe that this is the future and that this is going to definitely pay off. So very, very good sign here. Despite the price, it's probably a really good buying opportunity actually for Cameco because they're going to dominate not only the uranium production and refining field, but also now they have a really, really strong lead in the overall reactor servicing and utility field too. So very excited about that. Lastly, I want to go over CPI. So this data came out last Thursday. Total CPI was up 8.4% on a yearly basis, which was not a new high, but over month, it was up 0.4%, which was, I think, a 3-month high, so not really a huge deal there. Energy was down once again, which pushed total CPI down, and now the energy CPI index is actually down 11.3% in the last 3 months. So that's definitely had a downward effect on CPI, but we're still seeing the CPI growth. And core CPI, which doesn't include energy or food, was up again, 0.6% month over month, actually the 5th time that it's done that this year. And year over year, it made a new high at 6.6%. So total CPI not making new highs, but core CPI just keeps going up. And there are, it's not just one thing affecting this. It's actually a lot of different areas in core CPI are going up too. And I know it said it didn't include food and energy, but food actually is one of the biggest components of CPI, and that's still up, I think, 13 or 14% year over year. So that's not helping things either. Yeah, inflation really is persistent in a lot of areas in core CPI. So, for example, shelter, that's 32.5% of total CPI. That was up 0.7% month over month. Medical services, that is 6.86% of total CPI. That was up 0.99% month over month. And transportation, and by the way, medical services is basically paying for things like doctor appointments, really any kind of specialist visit, hospital visits. That's what makes up the medical services field in CPI. Transportation, which is things like car repairs, car insurance, I believe those are the two biggest factors in there. But transportation is 5.86% of total CPI. So that's only a couple percent lower than energy. So people always kind of exaggerate energy's impact. It does have an impact because of the number it does to input costs for companies, which we're going to get to in a second. But some of these other things like medical services and transportation are almost as big as energy. But yeah, transportation was up 1.69% month over month. So not a small jump for any of these three. That definitely had a big impact on core CPI being up 0.6% month over month once again. So I still think the biggest reason for all of this inflation is because of the very strong jobs market. Companies obviously are going to have to compete more than ever. I believe this is a kind of a historical labor shortage where there's 1.75 job openings for every unemployed person in the labor force. So in order to really attract labor, companies are going to have to keep raising their wages, and the wages still are not as high as inflation. So they're going to have to keep doing this even more. That is obviously an input cost into a company. The two biggest input costs are labor and energy. So energy's down, but labor is still growing quickly. Companies can't seem to hire fast enough. Although I do think that's going to change in the next couple months, or maybe 4 or 5 months out at most. We already saw this in the job openings data that was down by over 1 million in August. So that is, I think, in the process of changing. But yes, so companies are going to have to continue to pay people more, which is going to wear on their margins. And margins are going to be a key thing to watch in this upcoming earnings season. And we've already seen margins be hurt by energy and to some degree by labor. But I think this labor shortage is going to continue to have a really bad effect on corporate profits, operating margins, things like that. So with companies not making as much profit, obviously they're going to have to change something, and they're going to have to lower costs in any way possible. And energy costs are really hard to lower, especially for companies that have a lot of physical locations, because keeping the lights on and the AC on and the heat on is obviously a huge priority for these companies. It's easier to lay people off and just have the rest of the people work more. And I think that that's the result that we're going to see. So layoffs down the road, I think, are going to be the biggest thing, or at least the most likely thing by far, that's going to crush demand. Nothing is going to hurt demand from consumers like layoffs, because as long as people have a job and they're making a decent amount of money and they're getting raises because of inflation, they're more likely to spend. And that's what we've seen. Even though personal savings have been totally wiped out by inflation, people are still spending on credit cards. And it's I don't see that stopping without layoffs really taking a big chunk out of the jobs market in general. We just saw Microsoft say that they're laying off another 1,000 people. I think a couple months ago they laid off almost 2,000. So it's hitting the bigger companies too. A lot of small tech companies have been crushed by this, but it is definitely having an effect on bigger companies too. I think Meta also made a big announcement over maybe a couple weeks ago, but they said 12,000 employees, 15% of its workforce may lose jobs amid quiet layoffs. So, again, these are, I think we're just getting started in terms of layoffs. And again, that is the most likely thing that's going to hurt demand. Unfortunately, it's not like I want layoffs to happen or anything like that. Nobody wants to root for layoffs, but with inflation this rampant and this widespread across pretty much every component of the CPI at this point, except for like used cars and energy, those are the only things that are going down on a year-over-year basis, and really on a month-over-month basis too, consistently. So we need demand to go down. In order for that, I think probably layoffs are the most likely. You can call it a solution if you want, but I think that's too nice. But the most likely scenario for demand to go down is layoffs. So that's what I'm going to watch, and we're gonna be able to see this coming because of deteriorating margins in companies. They're also going to do things like cut dividends and stop share buybacks. Share buybacks being cut will probably be before dividends. But yeah, I definitely expect job openings to come off the market for sure over these next couple months, and that'll probably be followed by layoffs, and we'll see some layoffs in between now and then as well. So that is it for this week. Hopefully everybody enjoyed this update. Definitely leave a comment below, and give me a follow on Substack as well. That's kind of a longer form form of these videos. I go into more detail in the actual articles themselves. So definitely check that out, and I will see everybody again on Friday for the crypto update. So again, thank you very much for watching.